Welcome to our deep dive into the source material. We are so glad you could join us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
If you are someone who likes to peel back the layers on heavily mythologized historical figures, today is going to be genuinely fascinating.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
We are looking at a comprehensive collection of information detailing the life of T.E. Lawrence.
The mission here is to look past the sweeping cinematic myth of Lawrence of Arabia and try to understand the complex, deeply contradictory, and, undeniably brilliant reality of the man.
The man who played such a pivotal role in shaping the modern Middle East. It's a necessary unmasking, really.
Totally.
Because when you actually dig into the facts of his life, you realize the historical T.E. Lawrence wasn't just a dashing soldier in flowing robes leading cavalry charges.
Right.
He was an archaeologist, a fluent Arabic speaker, a diplomat, a brilliant writer, and eventually a mechanic.
He lived a life so dense with incident and geographical movement that it almost reads like fiction.
The sheer breadth of his activities is staggering. Yet underneath all of that external action, you find a highly nuanced, fiercely intelligent, and often deeply conflicted human being.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to even begin to understand the man who would eventually coordinate guerrilla fighters across the Arabian desert, we actually have to start in Wales.
Wales in 1888.
Yeah, with a highly unusual and secretive childhood. Lawrence was born illegitimate. His father was an Anglo-Irish landowner named Sir Thomas Chapman.
Who had left his wife and family.
Exactly. He left them to live with his daughter's governess, Sarah Joner.
And the two of them never officially married, but they lived together under the pseudonym Lawrence.
That underlying secret is foundational to his psychology.
It really is. Growing up in a highly moralistic Victorian and Edwardian society, knowing that your family's entire public identity is built on a fabrication.
That creates a profound need to hide.
To hide, to compartmentalize, and to constantly manage how the world perceives you.
But what's fascinating here is how his early solitary interest actively paved the way for his later military intelligence career.
Yeah, as a teenager in Oxford, he developed an absolute obsession with medieval architecture and antiquities.
He wasn't just reading about history, he was physically immersing himself in it. He was completely relentless about it.
Relentless is the perfect word. At 15, he and a friend were cycling all over the countryside, systematically studying parish churches.
And making intricate rubbings of monumental brasses. They even monitored construction sites in Oxford.
Acting as amateur salvage archaeologists.
Right, and they gave anything of historical value they found straight to the Ashmolean Museum.
And then it scales up dramatically. In 1908, while he's studying history at Jesus College, Oxford, he cycles 2,200 miles solo through France.
2,200 miles.
On a bicycle. Just to study medieval castles.
And the very next year, he embarks on a 3-month walking tour of crusader castles in Ottoman-controlled Syria.
Covering 1,000 miles on foot, which is an astonishing feat of physical endurance.
Not to mention cultural immersion for a young English student at the time.
Exactly. That deep, ground-level exposure to the Middle East, walking the landscape, interacting with the locals, experiencing the harsh realities of the terrain.
That became the core foundation for his Oxford thesis on crusader castles.
More importantly, it caught the attention of the right people.
It landed him a job as a practicing archaeologist at a site called Carchemish in northern Syria.
Working for the British Museum under the mentorship of D.G. Hogarth and alongside another archaeologist, Leonard Woolley.
And this dig at Carchemish wasn't just a quiet academic endeavor. They were working right next to a German-led engineering team.
A team that was constructing the Baghdad Railway.
Right, so there was constant tension, jurisdictional friction over land, and disputes over the local workforce.
So Lawrence, in his early 20s, is out there essentially running interference.
Learning Middle Eastern leadership practices, navigating tribal conflict resolution, and becoming highly proficient in Arabic.
It was essentially a masterclass in regional diplomacy and intelligence gathering, which leads us directly to 1914.
Right, as the geopolitical tensions of the First World War are reaching a boiling point.
Lawrence and Woolley are co-opted by the British military for an operation that was essentially an archaeological smokescreen.
This is where the story takes a rather bizarre turn.
Oh, totally.
The military sends them into the Negev desert. The expedition is officially funded by the Palestine Exploration Fund.
And the stated goal is to search for a region mentioned in the Bible called the Wilderness of Zin.
It sounds incredibly academic, almost like an Indiana Jones setup.
But the entire biblical expedition was just a cover story.
Well, cover story might conjure up images of cinematic espionage, but it was really practical military reconnaissance,
Wrapped in the respectable cloak of academia.
which was a surprisingly standard tool of empire back then. The Negev desert was strategically vital.
Because any Ottoman army attempting to attack British-held Egypt and the Suez Canal would have to cross it.
Exactly. So while Lawrence and Woolley did fulfill their academic obligations and published an archaeological report on their findings,
Their primary directive was to update the notoriously inaccurate maps of the region for the British military.
they were specifically cataloging strategic features. Most importantly, the location and capacity of water sources.
And that reconnaissance work smoothly transitions him into formal military intelligence in Cairo when the war officially breaks out.
He is assigned to the Air Bureau, producing maps, interviewing prisoners of war, and loudly advocating for an independent Arab Syria.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
The Arab Revolt kicks off in 1916.
Sharif Hussein, the Emir of Mecca and the head of the Hashemite dynasty, launches an uprising against the Ottoman Empire with British backing.
Lawrence is sent into the field to liaise with Hussein's son, Emir Faisal.
And when Lawrence arrives, Faisal's Arab forces are focused on Medina.
Medina is Islam's second holiest site, and the Ottomans have it heavily fortified with a massive garrison.
And this is where Lawrence's genius for asymmetrical warfare truly emerges.
He looks at the strategic board and realizes that a direct assault on Medina would be an absolute bloodbath.
The Bedouin fighters were incredibly brave and resourceful, but they were highly individualistic.
They were a guerrilla force, completely unsuited for traditional, organized line battles against entrenched, regular troops equipped with modern artillery.
So Lawrence argues for a strategy of deliberate, calculated inaction regarding the stronghold of Medina.
He advises them to essentially ignore a massive enemy army sitting right in their territory.
It defies conventional military doctrine, but it was strategically brilliant.
The Ottoman garrison in Medina was already suffering terribly from disease, isolation, and low morale.
By leaving them entrenched there, but constantly and unpredictably attacking the Hejaz Railway.
Which was the single vulnerable supply line running hundreds of miles south from Damascus.
Exactly. Lawrence forced the Ottomans into a logistical nightmare.
They had to dedicate vast amounts of troops, materials, and engineering resources just to defend and repair thousands of miles of exposed train tracks.
In the middle of a hostile desert.
He essentially turned the Ottoman army's size and reliance on infrastructure into their biggest weakness.
And Lawrence isn't just planning this from a tent. He's personally involved.
He's riding camels for days, wiring explosives to blow up train engines, and actively participating in these hit-and-run raids.
It all culminates in what is widely considered a tactical masterpiece, the Battle of Aqaba in 1917.
Aqaba was a crucial, heavily fortified coastal town on the Red Sea.
If the British Navy tried to attack it from the sea, the Ottoman naval guns and the heavily defended mountain passes leading inland would have decimated them.
So Lawrence collaborates on a joint action with Arab irregulars, primarily led by the formidable leader Atta Abu Tai.
Instead of launching a naval assault, they undertake a grueling, highly dangerous overland journey across the unforgiving Nefud Desert.
They swing completely around the Ottoman defenses, enduring unimaginable heat and thirst, to approach Aqaba from the inland side.
The side was completely undefended, because the Ottoman commanders simply never believed a fighting force could survive that desert crossing to attack them from the rear.
They took the town in a stunning, sweeping victory.
It is a textbook example of outthinking your opponent, and I want you, the listener, to pause and reflect on the underlying principle here.
How often do we fail at a complex problem because we are stubbornly trying to force a traditional solution onto a non-traditional situation?
Right. Lawrence succeeded at Aqaba and throughout the Hejaz campaign, specifically because he recognized that traditional European military tactics were useless in the vastness of the Arabian desert.
He adapted his strategy entirely to leverage the unique mobility of his allies and to exploit the specific, rigid vulnerabilities of his enemy.
That adaptability is incredible to study.
It is. But as much as we analyze these tactical victories, diving deeply into this source material reveals a very dark, physically and psychologically devastating side to this story.
The man behind the growing myth was suffering immensely.
The physical toll alone was brutal. He endured dozens of injuries throughout the campaign, including broken bones, bullet wounds, and shrapnel strikes.
But the psychological trauma he carried was far more severe.
The historical record is unflinching about the horrific reality of this conflict. Lawrence was intimately involved in brutal, close-quarters engagements.
But the most harrowing personal event occurred at Dara in November 1917.
While reconnoitering the area in disguise, he was captured by the local Ottoman forces.
According to his own detailed accounts, he was severely beaten, tortured, and sexually assaulted by the local governor and his guards.
While historians have sometimes debated the exact sequence of events, his biographers uniformly note that the incident had a profound, permanent psychological effect on him.
He later wrote about Dara with devastating clarity, stating that there, the citadel of his integrity had been irrevocably lost.
And compounding that horrific personal trauma was an agonizing, ever-present sense of political guilt.
Right, remember, he was the face of the British Empire to these Arab forces.
He was fighting alongside them, bleeding with them, and continually promising them an independent Arab state as the ultimate reward for their sacrifice and their uprising.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the geopolitical tragedy of the era truly unfolds.
While Lawrence was making these promises in the desert, he became aware of the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement.
This was a clandestine arrangement between Britain and France, negotiated behind closed doors, to essentially carve up the Middle East into European spheres of influence after the war.
They were drawing arbitrary lines on a map, lines that completely contradicted the promises of Arab self-government.
And lines that created the borders and geopolitical tensions we are still dealing with in the Middle East today.
He knew about this betrayal while he was still asking men to die for the cause.
He wrote about this agonizing position, stating he had to join the conspiracy and assure the men of their reward, knowing full well it was a lie.
He described feeling continually and bitterly ashamed. He realized he had been utilized as a highly effective pawn in a massive imperial deception.
That immense guilt didn't just fade away after the war ended, it completely consumed him.
And it deeply colored how he wrote his own history in his massive memoir, 7 Pillars of Wisdom.
He was writing through a lens of trauma, shame, and exhaustion.
Decades later, the murky nature of his trauma and the dramatic flair of his writings opened the door to intense scrutiny.
Specifically in 1955, with the publication of a biographical inquiry by an author named Richard Aldington.
Aldington's book was essentially a full-scale character assassination. It's worth noting the context here.
Right, Aldington was a staunch Francophile who actively defended French colonial interests in the Middle East,
which naturally put him ideologically at odds with Lawrence's push for Arab independence.
Aldington accused Lawrence of being a pathological liar, a Francophobe, and of continuously and shamelessly exaggerating his wartime accomplishments.
Now, we have to look at these accusations impartially based on the historical documentation. Did Lawrence exaggerate certain details?
Yes, the evidence indicates he did. There are several documented discrepancies.
For instance, he claimed to have read 50,000 books in the Oxford Union Library while he was a student,
which is mathematically staggering and highly improbable.
He also claimed to have personally blown up 79 bridges during the campaign,
though the records show that at least 11 of those were detonated by a completely different allied group, reinforcing the Hashemites.
He claimed to have crossed the Sinai Peninsula in a grueling 49 hours without sleep.
While his own diaries reveal the journey took over 70 hours and did include sleep breaks.
Aldington also hammered him on a claim regarding a massive bounty. Lawrence wrote that there was a 50,000-pound bounty on his head from the Ottomans.
But Aldington argued the historical records suggest it was closer to 10 or 20,000 pounds.
But there is a massive, crucial piece of context that explains so many of these discrepancies.
Yes. Lawrence wrote the original draft of 7 Pillars of Wisdom shortly after the war.
And then he lost the entire manuscript at a railway station in Reading.
Imagine writing a 250,000-word manuscript, the definitive account of your life's most traumatic and significant work,
and simply leaving your bag on a train platform with absolutely nothing backed up.
It is a writer's worst nightmare. Because he lost that primary draft, he was forced to rewrite the massive text entirely from memory.
Years after the actual events took place and without access to many of his original contemporary field notes.
When you factor in the sheer panic of having to rewrite a book of that magnitude from scratch,
combined with trying to remember exact timelines, troop numbers, and currency conversions from a chaotic guerrilla war,
while suffering from severe untreated PTSD,
the embellishments and smudged approximations become much more understandable.
They don't read like the malicious lies of a con artist. They read like the flawed, reconstructed recollections of a traumatized mind, trying desperately to rebuild a lost history.
Precisely. The intent matters. And his actions after the war further reinforce that he wasn't a man seeking glory.
So what does this all mean for the man himself once the guns fell silent?
You would assume a hero of his global stature would be living large, advising prime ministers, or enjoying high society.
But the reality is the exact opposite. He became an incredibly reluctant, almost desperate celebrity.
An American journalist named Lowell Thomas had created a highly sensationalized traveling stage show called With Allenby in Palestine and Lawrence in Arabia.
It featured dramatic photos and films of Lawrence in his Bedouin robes and was seen by millions of people across London and the world.
It made Lawrence a global superstar, a genuine household name.
But Lawrence fundamentally despised the attention.
He was intensely uncomfortable with his fame, the cinematic myth that was being built around him, and the persistent guilt over the political outcome in the Middle East.
To escape the suffocating public eye, he took drastic, almost self-punishing measures.
He sought the complete anonymity of the enlisted ranks. He joined the Royal Air Force as a simple private under a fake name, John Hume Ross.
The lengths he went to were incredible. He actually got caught during the recruitment process.
The recruiting officer didn't believe his fake documents or his physical fitness for the role.
And Lawrence had to get a high-ranking messenger from the RAF to deliver a direct order forcing the recruitment office to accept him.
When the press eventually tracked him down and exposed his true identity, he was forced out to avoid a media circus.
So he changed his name again, this time legally to T.E. Shah, joined the Tank Corps for a miserable stint, and eventually relentlessly begged his way back into the RAF.
He just wanted the structured, quiet anonymity of an enlisted mechanic.
He even refused to take any personal profit from the general public release of his abridged book, Revolt in the Desert.
He could have been incredibly wealthy, but he set up a trust that funneled all the royalties directly to an RAF charity for the families of airmen who had died.
In his final years in the military, he found a measure of peace, working on the technical development of high-speed rescue motorboats for the RAF.
He was driven to the specific, obscure work after the trauma of witnessing a seaplane crew drown simply because the existing rescue tender was too slow to reach them in time.
He finally retired from the military in 1935, hoping to live a quiet life at his small cottage in Dorset.
He was a passionate motorcyclist. He owned 8 different custom-built Bro Superior motorcycles over the course of his life,
Which were basically the fastest, most elite machines of their day.
On May 13, 1935, just 2 months after leaving the RAF, he was riding near his cottage.
The mechanics of the crash are tragically simple. He was riding at speed, and there was a sudden dip in the country road that completely obstructed his view forward.
As he crested the blind spot, he suddenly came upon 2 boys riding bicycles in the road.
He violently swerved to avoid hitting them, completely lost control of the heavy motorcycle, and was thrown violently over the handlebars.
He suffered massive head trauma and died 6 days later in the hospital at the age of just 46.
It was a painfully senseless, abrupt end for a man who had survived years of brutal warfare, espionage, and extreme danger.
But there is one final, incredibly profound legacy that stems directly from that specific accident.
One of the medical professionals who attended Lawrence in the hospital during those final 6 days was a neurosurgeon named Hugh Cairns.
Cairns was so deeply moved and intellectually disturbed by the loss of this brilliant life to a completely preventable head injury
That he dedicated a significant portion of his medical career to researching the biomechanics of motorcycle crashes and head trauma.
His extensive research and persistent advocacy directly led to the invention and eventually the widespread legal adoption of crash helmets for both military and civilian motorcyclists.
It's a staggering butterfly effect. The man who mapped the Negev Desert, who helped orchestrate the fall of the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East,
Ended up indirectly saving millions of lives on modern roads because of the tragic nature of his death.
it perfectly encapsulates the unpredictable, sprawling impact of his time on Earth.
From his early days as a teenager taking rubbings of medieval brasses, to navigating the treacherous, deceptive politics of imperial powers, to seeking solace as a mechanic in the RAF.
Lawrence's life completely defies simple categorization.
He is the ultimate reminder that history is rarely made by simple heroes or villains, but by deeply flawed, highly capable individuals reacting to extraordinary circumstances.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through the source material today. We started with the boy cycling through France, followed him into the scorching tactical brilliance of the Arab Revolt, navigated the agonizing heartbreak of political betrayal, and ended with the invention of the motorcycle crash helmet.
By looking past the Hollywood robes and reading the raw historical facts, we get to see the deeply traumatized, endlessly searching, and undeniably brilliant human being behind the legend.
And as we conclude our analysis of these sources, this raises an important question for you to consider on your own.
Think back to that lost manuscript at the Reading Railway Station. Lawrence was forced to reconstruct his entire history of the Arab Revolt from a fractured, traumatized memory.
And that specific, rewritten, highly dramatized version of events went on to shape the entire world's romanticized view of the Middle East for nearly a century.
It influenced Western policymakers, writers, and the broader public imagination.
How much of our modern understanding of global history, and perhaps even our current geopolitical reality, might look completely different today if one man simply hadn't misplaced his bag at a train station?